Welcome to FAQ, the show specially modified for the armchair expert. On today's show, we'll be looking behind the headlines at what all the fuss is surrounding GM food. We'll be taking a holiday in space and checking out how your letters get from A to B. We go on location to a top technology hotspot at the Greenwich Observatory, and we find out what the weather's like out there. The answers to all this and more will be revealed on FAQ. First, we tackle the controversial subject of genetically modified food. Scientists say it's the answer to world famine, but it still has to be grown at secret locations. Just what is the big deal about GM grub?
From the beginning of history, people have been selecting plants and indeed animals for best agricultural use, choosing the ones which grew best and then recrossing them so that you could get better breeds out of them. What they were doing, although they didn't know, was to exchange the genes in the plants and animals, because all of our properties are controlled by our genes. People, of course, want to know what genetically modified foods are. First thing you have to know is what a gene is. A gene is really an instruction for making a bit of us or a bit of a plant. And genetic modification is really the most recent development, where instead of blindly crossing plants, and we don't really know what we've done to the genetics, we don't know how many hundreds or even thousands of genes have been exchanged between plants, we now do it precisely.
GM foods are made for two main reasons, but essentially it allows an increased productivity of a certain part of the food. The other reason is to protect the plant against particular herbicides.
The genes which are actually introduced into a plant, the genes which are new for that plant, could in principle come from anywhere. And we've heard stories about fish genes in tomatoes. Not actually true at the moment, but it could happen in principle, because a gene is a gene is a gene. All the genes from all the organisms are really very similar to one another, and that's why one can move them around. We're all related. We're related to tomatoes. Odd though it may sound, but that's what we are.
The genes are either made by means of making pieces of DNA on a DNA manufacturing system in a machine, or else they've been isolated from another plant or organism. There are two major concerns. One is that you produce superweeds, and the second is that you produce cross-pollination with other plants.
One of the things people are worried about GM crops is the possibility that once they're out in the field, if they should do harm, you can't recall them. A number of studies have been made on environmental effects, and so far there appears to be very little damage indeed.
I don't believe that there have been any dangers shown on eating or ingestion of the foods. The people are concerned, though, about the unknown, and clearly experiments are being undertaken to check that the foods are indeed safe.
There was a report just recently in Nature in this country that suggests that dangerous weeds do not readily develop from the sorts of GM crops that we're likely to grow in this country. So, whereas we might find something wrong tomorrow or next year, so far there appears to be very little danger.
Now, how does Postman Pat get his letters to your doormat? How does your mail-order DVD reach you in pristine condition? We go to one of London's largest mail sorting offices to find out all about the latest technology being used to deliver the goods.
Within this mail centre, we'll handle over 4.5 million items a day. That is, items posted within South East and South West London to go anywhere in the world, and items anywhere in the world to be delivered in South East and South West London. We work on a 3-shift rotate. The mail process downstairs, the late shift, will handle up to 1.3 million first-class letters through their shift. Postcodes are worked out to people's addresses. They can be, the last 3 characters are an inward postcode, which can break it down into one of 50 houses. The outward is broken down into sectors and areas. The Royal Mail has invested over £200 million in automation. We call it an integrated mail processor. The mail will arrive in the mail centre and we will tip it on our first unit, on our hopper unit. All we will do then is take out the packets and the A4. The mail will then travel up into the drum system, which will then pick out 6mm thicknesses. Anything over that will go out and we will then have to do it by hand. There is a tracking point where the machine will track every single piece of mail through the whole of its journey. The first point will be a scanner unit where all we're going to look for is the red dots, which is postcode and machine language. The mail piece will then go to 2 cameras or scanners, and they are facing front and back. What they're able to do is read both sides of the letter and actually work out the address from the postcode upwards. If the machine has been able to read it, bad handwriting or a bad font, an image will go upstairs to a coder on the first floor. They will then action that image, because that is a question. Once it's done that, the mail pieces will then go into one of 160 boxes. Each box represents a different sortation to a different mail centre. If you don't put the postcode on, it can slow the mail down. The machine might not be able to read it first time on the postcode, and it will then have to make another decision. We could also ask the coders to extract a town, and we have a standard format to extract codes. The machine will know it's first or second class because each stamp has a little phosphorescent bar inside it, and once the ultraviolet hits the stamp, it makes it glow, and the machine is able to find out whether it's a first or second class mail piece. Before the integrated mail processor, we used to have 3 different machineries to do the same function, and they would then take up to 2 hours to perform the function that integrated, the IMP, does in 2 minutes.
FAQ goes on the road now in our regular on-location feature from one of the world's top technology hotspots. We take a trip to the home of Meantime to find out about Britain's most famous observatory. The East End of London, traditionally known for cheeky Cockney chappies, dysentery and salt-of-the-earth gangsters. In recent years, a new broom has swept away many of the preconceived notions about the area, and regeneration has become rife. But there is one landmark which has endured the many changing faces of this area: the Royal Observatory at Greenwich.
Well, the Royal Observatory was founded in 1675 by King Charles II, and the aim of the observatory at that time was to solve the problem of navigation at sea, because ships couldn't find longitude, they kept having shipwrecks and numerous lives were being lost.
The Royal Observatory became a beacon of hope for shipping. While sailors had long been able to calculate latitude by measuring the angle between the horizon and the sun, or the pole star, longitude was more of a problem.
Well, longitude are the lines which run from the Earth's North Pole to the South Pole, and they measure how far east or west of a particular position you are. The problem with measuring longitude is essentially finding a 0 point. When you're out at sea, there's no easy way of knowing how far away you are from that 0 point. You can't tell it very easily by looking at the position of the sun or the stars in the sky. The way that you can measure longitude is to measure time difference around the Earth. If you know the time at a particular place and you know the time where you are, it's the difference between the two that tells you how far east or west you are.
It was agreed that Greenwich would become the point of zero longitude. You can even straddle the line between the eastern and western hemispheres. If sailors could measure the difference between their local time and Greenwich Mean Time, they could accurately chart their position and thousands of lives would be saved.
The problem with keeping track of your time at sea is that it's very difficult to carry a clock from one place to another that will keep time. Essentially, the most accurate clocks in the early 18th century were pendulum clocks. As soon as you take a pendulum clock to sea, then the motion of the ship will unsettle it and it will lose or gain time or even stop altogether. There was a big incentive to try and find out how to solve the longitude problem. Parliament had set aside a sum of £20,000, equivalent to £10 million in today's money, to anybody who could solve the problem. A man called John Harrison, a clockmaker from Yorkshire, was the first person to design clocks that were sufficiently accurate that they could be carried at sea without a significant loss or gain of time.
But at Greenwich, it's not all time, time, time. The dome at Greenwich houses what used to be the world's largest optical telescope. It was built in 1893 and weighs in at a colossal 9 tons. At one end is housed a 28-inch crown and flint glass lens.
With this telescope, you can see millions of light years. Even one of the nearest galaxies to our own, the Andromeda Galaxy, which is fairly famous, is 2 million light years away. And some of the more distant ones, it's quite possible to see 15, 20, 30 million light years.
Due to advances in science, Greenwich has been relegated from the Astronomy Premiership. However, it will continue to play an important part in the study of space and time, and will always remain the prime meridian of the world. That's all for this part of the show. Coming up in part 2, we'll be finding out how to forecast the weather and going on a space vacation. Join us after the break.
It's not life and death, it's a game.
If you take video games as seriously as we do,
It's not life and death, it's a game.
you'll know that gaming isn't just a matter of life or death.
The Xbox, the future of video games.
It's a lot more important than that. Game Over, Thursday at 7:30 on .tv.
It's not life and death.
It doesn't matter how good the machine is. Put the wrong thing in and it just won't perform as well as it might. It's the same with PCs. If you've just got a new PC, make sure you get the most out of the internet. Like this brand new version of AOL, the best yet and even easier to use.
Try it for yourself for absolutely nothing. AOL's call charge free 99-hour trial offer.
Try it now.
Call 0800 376 4444.
Foam burst from Imperial Leather. Release the lather.
People are funny, aren't they? Everyone different. Everyone a character. Treat their cars just like their homes. Always ready to invite you in. Oh, well, enough for a packet of fags.
Never leave anything on display. Don't give them an easy ride.
Yeah, okay. Right, I'm gonna go and get the fish, mate. You light the fire.
Is that a cow?
Your mozzarella.
Hey, thank you very much. Buffalo mozzarella, anyone?
superb. What's the chances of getting a whole load of this to take back home?
Well, she says it sells all over England.
No. Look at that, boys. Like the real McCoy. Beautiful, mate.
Taste the difference buffalo mozzarella from Sainsbury's. Just one of over 350 specially prepared foods chosen for their flavour.
The shocking final episode of Temptation Island is only days away.
If he did do something and he feels complete regret, I could live with that.
The moment of truth arrives as the couples confront their worst fears.
This was probably the hardest thing I've ever had to do.
Heart-wrenching confessions.
I had an intimate moment with someone.
Decisions that will change their lives forever.
I have no regrets over a single thing that I did here.
The finale of Temptation Island, Thursday at 10, Sky 1.
Welcome back to FAQ. Coming up, in Scientific Holy Grails, we'll be finding out all about gravity. And we serve up a mighty minute of fast facts about the enigma that is the moon. But now, have you ever gone out without your umbrella? Well, if you can read the skies like our next expert, you could end up staying warm and dry. FAQ speaks to the man who never gets his feet wet.
Weather maps, when you actually see them, say, on the television or in a newspaper, at first glance they do look rather confusing things with these lots of black lines all over the place. But if you can think of those black lines as being what we call isobars, lines of equal pressure, that's to say, if you could travel along one of those lines with, say, a barometer, then you would find that the pressure would stay at that particular value. So we use these isobars to allow us to see the structure of the atmosphere. Because our atmosphere is in a constant state of change, but you get areas of high pressure where there's a mass of air, and areas of low pressure where air is being depleted. And by drawing these isobars on a map, you can actually locate where those areas of accumulation or depletion are occurring, which is very, very important in weather forecasting, because we find that where air is depleted, that's where we usually get poor weather. And where it's actually being accumulated, that's where we get high pressure and very, very good weather. Early on in the last century, it was a Norwegian meteorologist called Birkenes who actually devised a model of what the atmosphere is like in terms of weather fronts. He actually came to the conclusion that there were features in the atmosphere called warm and cold fronts, and they actually indicate where warm and cold air are side by side actually on the surface of the Earth. By marking on those positions of where the warm and cold air lie, we can then see where most of the rain is going to be falling, and that can help us track the weather over a period of time. Weather forecasting is something everybody can do, because Mother Nature actually gives many signs in the sky of what she's going to be doing next. Probably the best signs of all are actually watching the different cloud forms, seeing how cloud changes with different forms over a period of time. For instance, usually when we've got a depression, a low pressure area which is going to bring rain across the United Kingdom, we get a succession of cloud types. We start off with very, very high cloud, which we call cirrus cloud, and with that type of cloud we may get halo type phenomena, where you get a ring around the sun. And then as time goes on, that cloud will lower and thicken, eventually becoming like ground glass, and we call that cloud altostratus. Now, when you see that type of effect, you know that the rain is not terribly far away, and it's those cloud forms which amateur meteorologists can follow today to actually see what's going to be happening next.
Now it's time for a high dose of fascinating facts about everybody's favourite astral body as we go rocket-bound to the moon for today's Mighty Minute. Now, future makers are currently planning the ultimate holiday locations for the 21st century. If you'd like a vacation where no man has boldly gone before, the reality may be closer than you think. We take a trip to the British National Space Centre to find out more.
When can we expect to have a holiday in space? It's quite an open question. Depends upon what kind of holiday you're talking about. If you're thinking of having a holiday where you're going to be spending several weeks in space, then I think it's going to be 30 or 40 years before we can expect it. If you're thinking about a quick trip, maybe 20 minutes or an hour, just going up into space and down again, then it could happen within about 10 to 15 years. An aeroplane will enable people to go into space who have not had special training, who haven't been through special fitness regimes. For a short time, of course, it would just be a kind of plane which went up and came down. But for an extended holiday, it will be necessary to transfer into a space structure of some kind. I expect people would want to prepare themselves and test themselves out in some way. For example, if you weren't able to go on a fairground ride, it would be a little bit silly to think that you'd be able to go into space. I expect that the organisers would want to put people through some simple tests to see whether they could live happily in a confined space. There'd be all sorts of different things that we could try in space, things that we couldn't do on Earth. I'm sure somebody will invent some ball game which requires the people to fly around the cabin. If you're there for 2 or 3 weeks, you're unlikely to suffer from the kinds of problems that astronauts and cosmonauts have experienced with health, with loss of calcium, with blood circulation problems. For the crew, the people looking after those on holiday, there would be a problem. I'm sure there'd have to be limitations on how long they could spend in space. The cost of a holiday in space at the moment is very expensive, but people who are not quite so rich can already book. If you've got £100,000 or $100,000, you can book a place in the queue to go on a holiday in space. Now at that price, the kind of holiday is just a short trip into the edge of space, which might last 20 minutes or an hour. At the moment, it costs around $20,000 or more to send 1 kilogram into space. That means holidays are very expensive. But if in 20 or 30 years' time, the price can be brought down by a factor of 100 or more, then we will open up space tourism to the ordinary person. Space, the final frontier.
It's time for our regular feature, which looks at the solutions for the ultimate prize and tackles the still unanswered conundrums of the age. Today's FAQ grasps the gauntlet thrown down by Sir Isaac Newton as we try to solve one of the great riddles of all time.
Okay, we all feel the effects of gravity. It keeps our feet on the ground, it keeps the Earth orbiting the Sun. It's basically a force which attracts any two objects that have mass together, but it's such a weak force that we only notice it for very massive objects, like planets.
When we get deeper than that, we're straight into the world of theoretical physics, which has two theories about gravity. One is the Einstein principle, that it is the result of the warping of time and space. So it looks at things on the astronomical, huge level.
We think that gravity is actually the waves and ripples in space-time caused by masses accelerating, but because it's so weak, no one's ever been able to detect them. But although it's weak, they're actually very long range, so scientists are hoping that they might be able to detect gravity waves from huge cataclysmic events, such as two black holes colliding or supernovae exploding.
The other theory comes from quantum physics, which deals with things on the subatomic level. And that theory holds that gravity is the result of mysterious weightless particles called gravitons that carry the force from one place to another.
Gravity waves are a completely different kind of wave to X-rays or light or radio waves. So if we could detect them, it would be like hearing the universe when previously you've only ever seen it. It would be a completely new picture of what's happening. And finally, if we could detect gravity waves and understand what gravity is, then perhaps we would be able to describe it along with all the other forces we know about in just one equation, which would be a vital step along the way to a theory of everything which would describe the whole universe.
Well, that's all we have time for this week. Join us soon for more answers next time on FAQ.
Stay tuned now for the premiere of News Bites, a series dedicated to bringing you a roundup of the latest technology headlines in the UK and further afield, after the break.
In our universe, time doesn't stand still. But at .tv, we have the power to turn back the clock. Brace yourself as we take a look at the best from the week. Games, gadgets, entertainment and technology for a brave new world in Technosphere. A new series starts Friday at 8 on .tv.